England, spring of 1809. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Church in Oxfordshire, casting jeweled patterns of ruby and sapphire across the white stone floor, where 200 guests waited in hushed anticipation. At the altar, Lady Juliana Fairmont stood perfectly still in her ivory silk gown, her gloved hands trembling slightly as they clutched a bouquet of white roses and lavender, her heart beating so loudly she was certain the entire congregation could hear it. She had waited for this moment through a year of proper courtship, through months of preparation and planning, through countless fittings and arrangements. Mr. Harold Dennison stood beside her, 45 years old, respected solicitor, longtime friend of her father, the Viscount, a man who had promised her security, respectability, and affection, if not the wild passion of youth. At 19, Juliana had convinced herself that passion was overrated, that what truly mattered was steadiness and devotion. Then Harold turned to face her, and she saw something terrible in his eyes, not love, but pity, and beneath it, something that looked remarkably like horror. If stories of love that defy society's cruelest judgments move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You won't want to miss what happens next. "Forgive me," Harold whispered, his voice barely audible above the rustle of silk and whispered speculation rippling through the pews. "Juliana, I cannot do this. I find myself mistaken." The church fell into shocked silence. Juliana's mind refused to comprehend the words, even as they echoed off the ancient stone walls. "This union," Harold continued, his face pale, "would be a disservice. I cannot, in good conscience, proceed." Before Juliana could speak, before she could even draw breath to respond, Harold Dennison turned and walked down the aisle, his footsteps echoing like gunshots in the terrible silence. The massive oak doors swung closed behind him with a finality that seemed to seal Juliana's fate. For a long moment, she stood frozen. Then the whispers began, soft at first, then growing in volume like a rising tide. Did he truly just— Poor Lady Juliana, rejected at the altar. What could she have done to drive him away? Perhaps he discovered some terrible secret. Her father, the Viscount of Fairmont, materialized at her side, his face pale with fury and humiliation. He took her arm with a grip that bordered on painful and led her down the aisle through a gauntlet of pitying stares and barely concealed gossip. The ride back to Fairmont Estate passed in numb silence, and when they arrived, Juliana went directly to her chambers and did not emerge for 3 days. The scandal rippled through society like a stone thrown into still water. Within a week, every drawing room in England buzzed with speculation about what Lady Juliana Fairmont must have done to cause such a dramatic rejection. Harold Dennison, for his part, left for the continent immediately, and his solicitor issued a brief statement expressing his client's deep regret for any pain caused, but offering no explanation for his actions. Juliana became a ghost in her own home, moving through the rooms like a specter, barely eating, speaking only when directly addressed. Her mother tried everything: gentle coaxing, stern lectures, introduction of potential suitors, but Juliana refused all callers with a polite but immovable coldness. "I will not subject myself to that humiliation again," she told her mother 2 months after the failed wedding. "I will remain unmarried. It is my choice." The Viscountess threw up her hands in despair, but eventually the family accepted what they viewed as Juliana's stubborn pride. The season came and went without her attendance. Then another, and another. Time, that relentless force that respects neither wealth nor status, continued its inexorable march forward. Juliana aged from 19 to 20, then 21, 22, 23. Each year, her prospects diminished further, until even her family stopped mentioning marriage. She had become, in the parlance of the ton, a confirmed spinster. Her reputation tarnished beyond repair, a cautionary tale whispered to young debutantes about the dangers of pride and pickiness. By the time she reached 24, Juliana had carved out a small, safe existence within the confines of her family's estates. She read extensively, managed the household accounts with mathematical precision, took long walks through the countryside, and carefully avoided any situation that might require her to engage with marriageable gentlemen. She had built walls around her heart so high and thick that she believed nothing could ever breach them again. Then, in the spring of 1815, those walls began to crumble. The ball at Thornbury House in London was a military affair, thrown to honor the Duke of Wellington's officers who had distinguished themselves in the Peninsular War. Juliana had not wanted to attend, but her younger sister Caroline was making her debut that season, and family duty demanded her presence as chaperone. She positioned herself in her customary spot, a chair near the refreshment table, partially concealed by an enormous potted palm where she could observe the festivities without participating in them. Caroline danced every dance, her laughter carrying across the ballroom like silver bells, and Juliana felt nothing but relief that her sister would not share her fate. It was during the third waltz that she first noticed him. Captain Jeremy Lockhart stood near the entrance to the ballroom, resplendent in his red military coat with its gold braiding and polished brass buttons. He possessed an easy confidence that drew the eye, but it was his expression that held Juliana's attention. A startling contrast of weariness and longing, as though he sought to remember something he feared he had forgotten during his years away. But it was not his appearance that caught Juliana's attention. It was the way he looked at the dancing couples, not with the calculating assessment of a fortune hunter or the bored tolerance of a man fulfilling social obligation, but with something that looked remarkably like longing. Magnificent, is he not? Lady Beaumont, a widow of 50 who had taken Juliana under her wing in recent years, appeared at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. Captain Lockhart, younger son of Baron Lockhart of Hampshire, quite the hero from what I understand, saved an entire company from ambush at Salamanca. "I am sure he is very brave," Juliana murmured, accepting the champagne and deliberately turning her attention back to her sister. "He is also, I might add, currently unattached. His older brother will inherit the title and estate, but Jeremy has his military pay and a small property from his maternal grandmother. Not a fortune, certainly, but respectable." Lady Beaumont: "I am merely observing, my dear. You know I gave up matchmaking schemes for you years ago. But I thought you might appreciate knowing that not all officers are fortune hunters or rogues. Some are simply men who have seen too much death and wish to remember what it feels like to be alive." Before Juliana could formulate a response, a deep voice spoke from directly behind her chair. "Forgive the intrusion, ladies, but I find myself in desperate need of guidance." Captain Lockhart bowed elegantly to Lady Beaumont, then turned those remarkable blue eyes on Juliana. "I have been away from England for 3 years, and I fear I have forgotten every dance step I ever learned. If I attempt to waltz, I shall certainly tread upon some unfortunate lady's toes and disgrace myself utterly. Perhaps you might tell me which dances require the least skill, so that I might participate without causing injury?" Lady Beaumont laughed with genuine delight. "You are either very clever or very honest, Captain Lockhart. I cannot decide which." "Cannot a man be both?" He smiled, but his eyes remained on Juliana, who found herself unable to look away. "I confess, honest clumsiness seems preferable to skilled deception." There was something in the way he spoke those words, skilled deception, that made Juliana wonder what he had witnessed during his years at war. She knew in that moment that Lady Beaumont had been right. This was not a careless rake or a calculating social climber. This was a man who had faced death and survived, and who now sought to reconnect with the living world he had left behind. "The quadrille is the most forgiving," Juliana heard herself say, speaking directly to him for the first time. "The patterns are simple, and if you lose your place, you can easily follow the couple beside you without drawing notice." "Thank you." He bowed again, this time to her specifically. "That is most helpful. Though I confess I had hoped you might also tell me your name, so that I might know whom to thank when I successfully navigate my first dance without catastrophe." "Lady Juliana Fairmont," Lady Beaumont supplied, before Juliana could deflect. "And I am Lady Beaumont, though I suspect you already knew that, you charming scoundrel." "I would never presume," he replied, his eyes still holding Juliana's. "But now that we have been properly introduced, might I be so bold as to request that very quadrille with Lady Juliana? I find I would be significantly braver knowing I had such knowledgeable guidance." Every instinct Juliana possessed screamed at her to refuse, to retreat behind her carefully constructed defenses. But something in his expression, a vulnerability beneath the charm, a genuine hopefulness, made her hesitate. "I do not dance, Captain Lockhart," she finally said. "Neither do I, as I have just confessed," he replied. "Perhaps we might stand together upon the floor and lend each other courage. I find myself in dire need of an ally who understands this complex social battlefield." Despite herself, despite 5 years of practiced coldness, Juliana felt her lips curve into a small smile. It felt strange on her face, like a forgotten language suddenly remembered. "Very well," she said. "But if you tread upon my toes, do not claim you were not warned." The quadrille was indeed forgiving, and Captain Lockhart proved more skilled than he had claimed. As they moved through the patterns, he spoke of inconsequential things: the weather, the quality of English tea compared to what he had endured in Spain, the peculiar challenge of learning to sleep in a bed after 3 years of makeshift camps. "You make it sound as though comfort requires practice," Juliana observed during one of the brief moments when the dance brought them together. "Everything worth having requires practice, Lady Juliana," he replied seriously. "Comfort, joy, trust. We become accustomed to hardship, and when ease presents itself, we hardly know what to do with it." The word struck something deep within her chest, and she found herself studying his face with new attention. Here was a man who understood loss, who knew what it meant to guard oneself against further pain. Here was someone who might comprehend the particular pain of learning to expect nothing, to want nothing, because wanting led only to disappointment. When the dance ended, he bowed and thanked her with such genuine warmth that she felt a tremor in her carefully constructed resolve. "Might I call upon you tomorrow?" he asked. "During the fashionable hour for morning calls, which I am told actually occur in the afternoon? I find I would very much like to continue our conversation about the necessity of practicing comfort." Juliana hesitated, her old fears rising up to choke her. But Lady Beaumont, still watching from her chair, gave the smallest nod of encouragement. "You may call," Juliana said quietly. "Though I warn you, Captain, I am not an easy acquaintance. I have very little practice at comfort, and I fear I have forgotten how to want it." "Then perhaps we might remember together," he replied, and bowed once more before disappearing into the crowd. Jeremy Lockhart called the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. He brought wildflowers and books, spoke of war without glorifying it, shared his fears and failures, as well as triumphs. Slowly, Juliana began to emerge from her self-imposed exile. She found herself looking forward to his visits, laughing at his stories, sharing pieces of her own history, though she never spoke of Harold Dennison or the wedding that had shaped her adult life. "You are like a fortress," Jeremy told her one afternoon as they walked through Hyde Park. "Beautiful and strong, but built for defense rather than welcome." "Perhaps I have reason for my defenses," she replied. "I do not doubt it," he said gently. "But fortresses are lonely places, Juliana. I have garrisoned enough of them to know." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and saw something she had not allowed herself to see before. Jeremy Lockhart was not Harold Dennison. He was young, vital, passionate, and he looked at her as though she was the most remarkable thing he had ever encountered. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "More than I ought," he replied simply. "I wish to understand the stories you hide behind those careful eyes. I wish to see you smile without that shadow of hesitation. And when this damnable war is truly over, when I can resign my commission, I want to marry you and spend the rest of my life proving that not all promises are broken." Marriage, promise, the very concepts that had destroyed her 5 years earlier. "I cannot," she said, pulling her hand from his arm. "Jeremy, you do not understand. Then help me understand." He moved to face her directly. "Tell me why you hide yourself away. Tell me who hurt you so badly." And so, standing there in Hyde Park, Juliana told him. She told him about Harold Dennison, about the altar, about the whispers and the shame. When she finished, he took both her hands in his. "Then he was a fool," Jeremy said fiercely. "And I am glad of his foolishness, because it means you were still unattached when I found you." He paused, his blue eyes searching hers. "I will not ask you to trust my words, Lady Juliana. I ask you to trust my sacrifice. When I can resign this commission and lay down my sword, I will use my time and my name to rebuild the reputation that cowards stole from you. The price of our union will be paid by me, and I will do so gladly." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But trust came slowly to wounded creatures. He kissed her then, right there in Hyde Park with her maid watching and several scandalized matrons passing by. It was brief, chaste by any objective measure, but it sealed something between them that words could not undo. "Wait for me," he whispered against her lips. "Promise me you will wait." "I promise," she whispered back, and felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. The weeks that followed were a fever dream of stolen moments and passionate declarations. Jeremy was leaving for Belgium in early June. Wellington was gathering forces to face Napoleon's latest campaign. They had so little time, and Jeremy seemed determined to fill every moment with intensity enough to last through their separation. Juliana's family hosted a ball in mid-May, and Jeremy attended in full dress uniform. After the required dances and social obligations, he found her in the garden, where she had retreated for air. "I leave in 2 weeks," he said without preamble. "Juliana, I need you to know, if something happens to me, if I do not return—" "Do not speak of such things," she interrupted, fear clutching at her heart. "I must," he insisted. "I have faced battle enough times to know that death plays no favorites. But I need you to know that these months with you have been the happiest of my life. You have given me something to fight for beyond duty and honor. You have given me a future to dream of." "Then come back to me," she said fiercely. "Come back and make those dreams real." "I will," he promised, pulling her into his arms. "I swear to you, Juliana, I will come back. We will be married. We will have children. 3 at least, I think. We will grow old together and bore our grandchildren with stories of how we found each other." She kissed him then, not the chaste kiss of Hyde Park, but something desperate and claiming. The kiss deepened, became something more urgent, and when his hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer, she did not resist. "Juliana," he breathed against her neck, "we should stop. I should not." Instead of speaking, she silenced him with another determined kiss, her hands tightening on his shoulders, refusing to let him go. When he pulled back to search her face, to give her one last chance to reconsider, she met his gaze steadily, her choice clear in the way she drew him deeper into the shadows, away from the ballroom lights. "You are certain?" His voice was rough with desire barely held in check. "If we do this, there is no undoing it." She answered not with words, but by reaching for him again, her actions speaking what propriety would never allow her to say aloud. What followed was both tender and passionate, hidden in the shadows of her family's garden while music drifted from the ballroom above. It was reckless, improper, and completely outside the bounds of acceptable behavior. But Juliana had spent 5 years being proper, being cautious, being safe. For once in her life, she wanted to feel alive, to claim something for herself, regardless of consequences. Afterwards, as they straightened their clothing and prepared to return to the ball separately, Jeremy held her face between his hands. "When I return," he said solemnly, "we will be married immediately. I will not have you compromised by my selfishness." "It was not selfishness," she replied. "It was us, and I regret nothing." "Nor do I," he said, "but I will not rest easy until you are my wife in truth, not just in heart." They returned to the ball, and if anyone noticed their absence, they were too polite to mention it. 2 weeks later, Jeremy departed for Belgium, and Juliana watched his ship disappear over the horizon, certain he would return. She was 24 years old, and for the first time since that terrible day at the altar, she allowed herself to hope. It was the last time she would see Captain Jeremy Lockhart alive. The Battle of Waterloo took place on June 18, 1815. The reports that filtered back spoke of great victory: Napoleon defeated, war ended, Wellington triumphant. But the casualty lists told a different story. 50,000 men killed or wounded. Captain Jeremy Lockhart was listed among the missing, presumed dead. His body was never found. When the official notification arrived at Fairmont Estate in early September, Juliana received it with numb disbelief. It was not possible. Jeremy had promised. But as weeks passed without word, without miracle, reality settled over her like a suffocating blanket. Jeremy was gone. The future they had planned, the promises they had made, all of it buried somewhere in Belgian soil. She grieved silently. Her family attributed her pallor to general mourning. Even Carolyn assumed her sister mourned a friend rather than a lover. Then, in late August, Juliana's monthly courses failed to arrive. At first, she told herself it was stress, grief. But when September passed without blood, when her breasts became tender and nausea struck each morning, the terrible truth became undeniable. She was carrying Jeremy Lockhart's child. The knowledge struck her with the force of a physical blow. She was unmarried, ruined, pregnant with a dead soldier's child. If anyone discovered her condition, complete social ruin would follow for her and her family. But worse than any of that was the thought of the child itself. Jeremy's child, conceived in love, now condemned to a life of shame and illegitimacy through no fault of its own. For 3 days, Juliana barely ate or slept, her mind racing through impossible options. She could not hide a pregnancy indefinitely. She could not claim legitimacy without an engagement. She could not, would not, seek out the women who provided darker solutions. Which left only one option, horrible as it was. She would have to leave, have the baby in secret, and then give it away. With trembling hands, she wrote to her father's sister, Lady Margaret Fairmont, who lived in Edinburgh, requesting an extended visit. Lady Margaret agreed immediately, and the Viscount, concerned about his daughter's melancholy, approved readily. In late September of 1815, Juliana traveled north to Edinburgh, carrying within her the last living piece of the man she had loved and lost. Edinburgh was colder than Oxfordshire, windier, with a wildness in the air that matched something inside Juliana's broken heart. Margaret listened with growing horror as Juliana confessed the truth. "Oh, my dear child," Margaret whispered. "You have been carrying this burden alone all these weeks?" "I did not know what else to do," Juliana replied. "Aunt Margaret, I am so afraid. The child is innocent. It deserves better than to be born a bastard." "Your mistake was loving," Margaret said firmly, "and that is never truly a mistake. We will manage this together." For 5 months, Juliana lived in near isolation. As her belly swelled with Jeremy's child, she found herself talking to it during the long Scottish nights, telling it about its father's blue eyes and brave heart, about promises that would never be kept. In mid-February of 1816, on a night when winds howled down from the Highlands, Juliana's labor began. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night. Margaret stayed by her side throughout. "Push, dearest," Margaret urged as dawn broke on the 15th of February. "Just once more." With a final effort, Juliana pushed, and suddenly the room filled with the angry wail of new life. The midwife wrapped the baby in clean linen. "A daughter, my lady," she announced, "small but healthy." Juliana looked down at the tiny face, red, wrinkled, perfect. The baby had wisps of dark hair like Jeremy's, and when she opened her eyes, they were that same astonishing blue. "Clara," Juliana whispered. "Your name is Clara." For 2 hours, she held her daughter, memorizing every detail. But reality could not be held at bay forever. "I cannot keep her," Juliana finally said, the words tearing from her throat. "Margaret, I cannot doom her to that life. She deserves better." "St. Giles Cathedral has a long history of caring for abandoned infants," Margaret said quietly. "The clergy there are known for their discretion and compassion." The word abandoned hit Juliana like a knife to the heart. But what choice did she have? On the night of February 20th, 5 days after giving birth, Juliana wrapped Clara in the softest blanket she could find, along with a small lace shawl that had belonged to Jeremy's mother. With shaking hands, she wrote a note. "Her name is Clara. She was born 15th February, 1816. Please care for her. Her mother loves her more than life itself, but cannot keep her without destroying both their lives. I pray someone kind will give her the future I cannot." Margaret accompanied her through the dark Edinburgh streets to St. Giles's Cathedral. The ancient church loomed against the night sky. At the great wooden door, Juliana pressed one final kiss to Clara's forehead. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I love you. I will always love you. But I cannot give you the life you deserve, and so I must give you to someone who can." She placed the bundle gently on the stone steps, rang the bell, and fled into the shadows. Behind them, the door opened, and Clara's wails echoed as strange hands lifted her. Juliana collapsed 3 blocks away, sobbing so violently she could not breathe. For 2 weeks after, she barely functioned, moving through Margaret's house like a ghost, hollow and broken, certain she had destroyed everything. "I have destroyed everything," she told Margaret one evening. "I bring only ruin to those who care for me." "You are not responsible for Harold's cowardice or Jeremy's death," Margaret replied firmly. "And you are most certainly not responsible for a society that punishes women for the same passion it celebrates in men. You loved Juliana. The world may call that a sin, but I call it courage." But courage felt like cold comfort when her arms were empty and her heart shattered. In early April, Margaret convinced Juliana to take a walk. They walked through the outskirts of Edinburgh toward the rolling hills that marked the beginning of the Highlands. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Juliana found the bleakness oddly comforting. At least the land did not pretend to offer easy answers. They were walking along a narrow road when she heard it, the thunder of hooves, the shrill whinny of an animal in distress. Juliana turned and saw a massive horse, its coat the color of storm clouds, racing toward them with wild eyes and flattened ears. The creature was clearly terrified, running blindly from some unseen threat. Before she could move, before she could even process the danger, a figure appeared, a man on foot running after the horse with impossible speed. He was enormous, easily 6 feet tall, with hair the color of burnished copper, catching the afternoon sun like flame. "Stand aside!" he bellowed in an accent thick with the rolling burr of the Highlands. "The beast is mad with fear!" But Juliana was frozen, trapped between the rearing horse and the stone wall bordering the road. The animal's hooves came down inches from where she stood, and she closed her eyes, certain she was about to be trampled. Strong hands seized her waist and literally threw her out of the horse's path. She landed hard on the grass beyond the road, the breath knocked from her lungs. When she looked up, the red-haired giant had already moved past her, had positioned himself between the panicked horse and the two women. "Easy, beauty," he murmured, his voice dropping from a bellow to something soft and soothing. "Easy now. No one here means you harm. Whatever frightened you is gone. You are safe." The horse reared again, but the man stood his ground, continuing to speak in that low melodic voice. Words in Gaelic that Juliana did not understand, but whose meaning was clear. Peace, safety, calm. Gradually, impossibly, the horse quieted. Its ears pricked forward, and it stretched its neck toward the man's outstretched hand. He caught the trailing reins, continued his soothing litany, and slowly ran his free hand along the animal's trembling neck. "There now," he said, switching back to English. "You are a brave lass, are you not? Frightened by shadows and determined to run yourself to death over nothing." He turned then to where Juliana still sat on the grass, and she found herself staring into eyes of such piercing grey blue they seemed to capture the very essence of the Scottish sky. "Are you harmed?" he asked, his concern evident despite the rough brogue. "That was a near thing. You should not freeze in the path of frightened creatures. They cannot help their fear." "I am unharmed," Juliana managed, though her voice shook. "Thank you. You saved my life." "Merely moved you out of harm's way," he replied, dismissing her gratitude, even as he studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "You are English." It was not a question, and something in his tone suggested this was not necessarily a point in her favor. "I am visiting my aunt," Juliana said, gesturing to Margaret, who had been helped to her feet by a groom who had finally caught up with his master. "We were only walking." "On a road known for horse traffic," the man pointed out. "You might have been killed. But I was not, thanks to you." Juliana finally managed to stand, brushing grass and dirt from her walking dress. "To whom do I owe my life, sir?" The man's lips quirked in something that might have been amusement. "Callum MacLeod, Laird of Glenfinnan. And you need owe me nothing, lass. The Highlands take care of their own, and apparently their visitors." "Lady Juliana Fairmont," she replied automatically, then saw Margaret's horrified expression and understood. The MacLeods were legendary in Scotland. Ancient clan, fierce reputation, considered half-wild by Edinburgh society. Proper English ladies did not associate with Highland Lairds. But Callum MacLeod did not look particularly wild at the moment. He looked like a man who commanded respect through competence rather than fear, who could gentle a panicked horse with nothing but his voice and presence. "I should return this beast to my stable before she decides to bolt again," he said, patting the now docile horse. "But I hope you will be more careful in future, Lady Juliana. Scotland is beautiful but unforgiving to those who do not respect her dangers." He swung onto the horse's back, an effortless movement that spoke of years in the saddle, tipped an imaginary hat to them both, and cantered away, his red hair bright as a banner in the afternoon light. Margaret pulled Juliana away immediately, speaking rapidly about the unsuitability of Highland Lairds and the importance of avoiding scandal. But Juliana barely heard her. She was remembering those storm-colored eyes, the way he had spoken to the frightened horse, the strength in his hands when he had pulled her to safety. For the first time in months, she had felt something other than grief and shame. She had felt alive. She told herself it was coincidence when she saw him again 3 days later. She and Margaret had gone to Waverley Market for provisions, and there he stood, Callum MacLeod, haggling with a cloth merchant over the price of wool, his copper hair unmistakable in the crowd. He looked up as if sensing her gaze, and his stern face broke into a smile that transformed him from intimidating to almost boyish. "Lady Juliana," he said, approaching with long strides, "you are recovered from your fright?" "Completely," she replied, aware of Margaret's grip tightening on her arm. "And you? Is your horse well?" "Bonnie is excellent. She was startled by a adder in the grass, nothing more. She has a gentle soul despite her size." He glanced at Margaret, then back to Juliana. Are you finding Edinburgh to your liking?" "Very much so," Juliana said, and realized it was true. The city's wildness, its refusal to pretend civilization had completely conquered nature, appealed to something in her that had been sleeping. "It is quite different from England." "Better, you mean," he said with a grin that made it unclear whether he was joking or serious. "Though I admit I may be biased." Before Margaret could pull her away, he bowed. "I am hosting a small gathering at my townhouse this Friday evening. A few friends, some music, nothing formal. If you would care to attend, both of you, I would be honored. I promise to keep all horses safely stabled." Margaret opened her mouth to refuse, but Juliana spoke first. "We would be delighted," she said. Margaret's lecture lasted the entire walk home. Highland Lairds were not suitable company. The MacLeods were notorious. Juliana was being reckless, foolish, courting scandal yet again. But Juliana had endured the worst scandal society could inflict. She had been abandoned at the altar, had borne a child out of wedlock, had given away her own baby. What further harm could befriend a Scottish nobleman possibly cause? More than that, when she looked at Callum MacLeod, she did not see judgment or pity. She saw only acceptance, and perhaps, just perhaps, interest. She was 25 years old, broken in ways that might never heal, and she had absolutely nothing left to lose. Callum MacLeod's Edinburgh townhouse was elegant but unpretentious, decorated with a mixture of classical refinement and Highland practicality. The gathering he had promised was indeed small, perhaps 20 people, an eclectic mix of Scottish nobles, merchants, and what appeared to be several artists and writers. "I collect interesting people," Callum explained as he introduced Juliana and Margaret around. "Life is too short to spend it only with those who share your exact station." Over the course of the evening, Juliana discovered that Callum MacLeod was not quite the wild Highlander Margaret had feared, though neither was he the refined Edinburgh gentleman. He spoke with a directness that bordered on blunt, his opinions strong and unapologetic. He played the bagpipes with fierce skill, drank whiskey instead of wine, and debated Highland politics with a passion that made the other guests uncomfortable. "Not what you expected, I think," he said later, finding her standing near the window that overlooked the city. When Edinburgh society speaks of Highland Lairds, they picture savages in bearskins. "And are they wrong?" Juliana asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. He laughed, a genuine rough sound. "Not entirely. We are less refined, less interested in your English philosophers and your polite conversation. We care for our land, our clan, our honor. Edinburgh thinks that makes us barbarous." "I am English," Juliana pointed out. "You are," he agreed. "But you are also something else, something I cannot quite name." He studied her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable. "You froze in front of that horse, not from fear. I know fear when I see it. From something else. Indifference, perhaps, or exhaustion." The observation was too close to truth for comfort. "You know nothing about me," she said quietly, defensively. "No," he admitted, and there was something like frustration in his voice. "I do not, and that is unusual. Most people are easy to read, but you guard yourself well, Lady Juliana. Too well, perhaps." He saw something, this Highland Laird. Not everything, but enough to intrigue him. "Why do you care?" she asked. "Because there is something about you that—" He paused, searching for words. "I too have known loss. I recognize its shadow, even when I cannot see its shape. And I find myself curious about what brought an English lady to Scotland, alone and guarded." Before she could respond, Margaret appeared, anxious to leave. But as Callum bid them farewell, he caught Juliana's hand briefly. "Come riding with me," he said quietly. "Tomorrow. Let me show you the real Scotland, the wild places." "That would be improper," she replied automatically. "Aye, it would," he agreed. "But I suspect you are tired of propriety, Lady Juliana." as tired as I am of pretending to be civilized when my soul calls for wind and heather and eagles." Something in his words, the wild places, called to the grief and rage she had been carrying since she placed Clara on those church steps. "Tomorrow," she agreed. "I promise to keep you safe," he replied, "from horses and from anything else that threatens." They rode together through the Highlands 6 times over 3 weeks. Each time, Callum showed her something new: hidden lochs, ruined castles, valleys of wildflowers. He taught her Gaelic phrases, told her stories, made her laugh. Slowly, Juliana found herself sharing pieces of her own story: the abandonment at the altar, the years of isolation, even Jeremy Lockhart and Waterloo. "You loved him," Callum said after she finished. They were sitting on a hillside overlooking Glenfinnan, watching the sunset. "I did," Juliana admitted. "Or I thought I did. Now I wonder if I loved what he represented, proof that I was still capable of being chosen." "And do you think you are?" Callum asked. "Capable of being chosen?" "I think I am incapable of guarding my own spirit," she replied. "I have spent so long being rejected or pitied that I have forgotten how to believe I might be worth choosing." Callum was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low. "I watched my father drink himself to death after my mother passed," he said. "I was 19 when he finally died, barely old enough to take on the lairdship. For years I was angry, at him, at fate, at God himself." He turned to face her. "But I learned something important, Juliana. We cannot control what life takes from us. We can only control what we do with what remains. You have had terrible things happen, things not your fault, but you survived them. You are here, and that means you still have choices ahead of you." "What if I choose wrong again?" she whispered. "Then you will survive that too," he replied. He studied her face with that unsettling intensity. "You have told me you fear making mistakes, Lady Juliana, but I believe your only mistake was waiting so long to commit to something right. You know well how to defend yourself, but you have forgotten how to accept an ally." He paused, letting the words settle. "I offer you the protection of my name and the strength of my clan. Which will be of greater value to you, your fear or my certainty?" Her heart gave a treacherous lurch. "You need not answer now," he interrupted before she could speak. "I am a patient man, but know this: I do not make promises I cannot keep. And if you give me the chance, I will spend every day proving that not all men are cowards or liars." "I want to trust you," Juliana said finally, "but I am afraid. Not of you, of myself, of making the same mistakes." "Then do not trust me yet," he replied. "Let me earn it. One day at a time, one ride at a time, until you wake up and realize that trust has grown without you noticing." It was the most honest courtship proposal she had ever received, and against all reason, she found herself nodding. "One day at a time," she agreed. But even as her relationship with Callum deepened, even as she found herself laughing more, smiling more, feeling more like herself than she had in years, Juliana could not escape the weight of her secrets. She had not told Callum about Clara, had not told him about the baby she had left on church steps, about the milk that had finally dried up, about the way she still woke some nights reaching for a child who was not there. How could she? What man would want a woman who had abandoned her own daughter? The question haunted her through 6 weeks of courtship, through stolen kisses and long conversations, through moments of connection so profound they frightened her with their intensity. Then, in late May, a letter arrived from her father. The Viscount was growing concerned about her extended absence. It was time, he wrote, for her to return home to England. "I must go," Juliana told Margaret that evening. "I have been here too long. Father is starting to ask questions." "And Lord MacLeod?" Margaret asked gently. "What will you tell him?" "The truth," Juliana said, though the words tasted like ashes. That I am English, he is Scottish, and our worlds are too different. Better to end it now, before either of us becomes more attached. But when she tried to tell Callum 2 days later, the words refused to come. They were riding through the Highlands again, and he was showing her a waterfall he had loved since childhood, and the joy in his face as he spoke of his home made her heart ache. "I have been thinking," he said as they dismounted near the falls, "about what you said, that you are incapable of guarding your own spirit. I disagree. I think you have been acting on your own behalf all along. You chose to survive Harold's rejection. You chose to love again with Jeremy despite the risk. You chose to come to Scotland. Every step, Juliana, has been you choosing to keep living even when life gave you every reason to stop. You make it sound noble," she said, "but mere survival is not the same as a life fully lived." "It is the beginning of living," he countered, "and I would very much like to help you with the next steps. Juliana, I know this is sudden, that we have known each other less than 2 months. But I am 30 years old. I know my own mind. And I want to marry you." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Callum, before you refuse, let me finish," he said, taking her hands in his. "I am not asking you to give me an answer today. I am asking you to consider it, to imagine what life could be like if you chose yourself, chose happiness, chose a future with someone who sees you clearly and wants you anyway." "You do not see me clearly," she whispered. "You see what you want to see. But Callum, there are things about me you do not know, things that would change how you feel." "Then tell me," he said simply. "Tell me these terrible secrets you think will drive me away." And so, standing beside that waterfall in the heart of the Highlands, with the roar of falling water drowning out the world, Juliana told him everything. She told him about the night in the garden with Jeremy, about the pregnancy, about the 6 months of hiding in Edinburgh. She told him about giving birth to Clara, about holding her for 2 brief hours, about leaving her on the steps of St. Giles Cathedral with nothing but a blanket and a note. "I abandoned my own child," she finished, tears streaming down her face. "I left her to strangers because I was too weak, too ashamed, too afraid to keep her. What kind of monster does that make me? What kind of woman abandons her own baby?" She waited for his face to change, for disgust or judgment to replace the affection she had seen there moments before. But Callum's expression remained steady, his gray eyes holding hers without flinching. He was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed what she had told him. The waterfall roared behind them, filling the space where words should be. Finally he said, "You were alone and cornered. It was a desperate act." He turned to her, his face grim but resolute. "The child is yours. That makes her of my concern now. Juliana, did you want to give her away?" "No," she sobbed. "God, no. It nearly killed me. I can still feel her weight in my arms. I can still hear the sound she made when the church door opened. I dream about her every night, what she looks like now, whether she is safe, whether whoever took her in loves her or merely tolerates her." "Then we will find her," Callum said, his voice brooking no argument. "We do not abandon our own. You will be my wife, and she will be my daughter. The MacLeods do not leave their blood to strangers when we have the means to reclaim them." "But she is out there somewhere," Juliana whispered. "My daughter, growing up without knowing her mother, without knowing she was wanted and loved and—" "Then we will find her," Callum interrupted. Juliana stared at him, unable to process the words. "What?" "We will find her," he repeated. "St. Giles Cathedral, you said? They keep records. We can inquire discreetly, find out which family took her in. Juliana, if we marry, and I very much hope we will, you will be Lady MacLeod. You will have power, position, protection. We can acknowledge Clara as ours, not as a bastard to be ashamed of, but as a daughter. Our daughter." "That is mad," Juliana breathed. "The scandal." "Society may be damned," Callum said firmly. I am a Highland Laird. Edinburgh society already thinks I am half savage. Let them whisper, let them judge. I care not a whit for their opinions if it means you can have your daughter back." "You would do that?" Juliana's voice broke on the question. "You would claim another man's child? Risk your reputation? Face society's judgment?" "In a heartbeat," Callum replied. "But more than that, Juliana, I would give you back the choice that was stolen from you. You did not want to give Clara away. You did it because you felt you had no alternative. But you have an alternative now. Me. A home in the Highlands where Edinburgh gossip cannot touch you. A title that gives you protection. And a husband who would be honored to be father to your child." The word husband broke through the last of her defenses, and Juliana collapsed into his arms, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. He held her through it, solid and warm and utterly unshakable, while the waterfall roared and the wind carried her tears away into the Highland sky. "I do not deserve you," she finally managed. "You deserve everything," he corrected, "and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." They married in a small ceremony at a chapel near Glenfinnan 2 weeks later. Only Margaret attended from Juliana's family. Her father had been informed by letter, but had not responded. The MacLeod clan, however, turned out in force, accepting their laird's English bride with the pragmatic generosity of people who valued character over pedigree. "You are clan now," Callum's cousin Angus told her at the simple reception that followed. "That means MacLeod business is your business. MacLeod troubles are your troubles. But it also means MacLeod strength is your strength. You are not alone anymore, Lady MacLeod." The name, Lady MacLeod, settled over Juliana like a mantle of protection. She was no longer Lady Juliana Fairmont, the woman abandoned at the altar. She was no longer the ruined woman who had borne a bastard and given it away. She was Callum's wife, a Highland lady, and that meant something here. But even in her joy, even in the warmth of Callum's arms on their wedding night, Juliana could not stop thinking about Clara. Somewhere in Edinburgh, her daughter was growing, nearly 4 months old now, perhaps beginning to smile, to recognize faces. Did she look like Jeremy? Did she have Juliana's eyes? Was she loved? "Tomorrow," Callum said, as if reading her thoughts. "Tomorrow we begin searching." The rector of St. Giles Cathedral was a kind-faced man named Reverend McIntyre who listened to their carefully rehearsed story that Lady MacLeod had a ward, a distant cousin's child left motherless at birth, whom she had arranged to be cared for temporarily, but now wished to reclaim. "February, you say?" Reverend McIntyre frowned, his fingers drumming on his desk. "We receive many unfortunate babes, Lady MacLeod. The records are not always as organized as they should be, and the families who take them in value their privacy." Juliana felt her heart plummet. "But surely you keep some accounting. A girl child left on the 15th of February, with a note. Her name was Clara." The Reverend rose slowly, moving to a cabinet filled with ledgers. "I will need to search through several months of entries. It may take some time. If you could return in a few days." "A few days?" Juliana's voice broke. Callum's hand found hers beneath the desk. "We will wait," Callum said firmly, "however long it takes." And wait they did. For 3 weeks, they returned to St. Giles Cathedral every other day, while Reverend McIntyre painstakingly searched through disorganized records, questioned other clergy, and made discreet inquiries among families known to take in foundlings. Juliana barely slept. Every night, she imagined Clara lost forever, adopted by people who would never reveal themselves, or worse, sold to workhouses or sent away. The waiting was agony, each day stretching like years. Finally, on a gray afternoon in late June, Reverend McIntyre sent word. He had found her. "A wee girl," he confirmed when they arrived, breathless with hope and fear. left on our steps in February, named Clara according to the note. She was taken in by the Morrison family, farmers who had lost their own bairn some years prior. They live just outside the city. Are they treating her well? Juliana whispered, hardly daring to breathe. Aye, very well, the Reverend assured her. The Morrisons are good people. They dote on the lass, but I must warn you, they have become very attached. This will not be easy for any of you. It was never going to be easy, Juliana said softly. But she is my daughter, and I have come to bring her home. The Morrisons' farm was small but well kept, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and honest living. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison met them at the door, their faces wary but polite, and showed them into a simple parlor where a cradle sat near the fire. Juliana's eyes went immediately to that cradle, her heart hammering so hard she thought she might faint. But Callum's hand at her back steadied her, reminded her that she was not alone in this. Reverend McIntyre said you have a claim on our Clara, Mrs. Morrison said, her Highland accent thick with emotion. Is that true? It is, Callum replied when Juliana could not find words. My wife placed the child at St. Giles's when she had no other recourse, but circumstances have changed. We are married now with a home and the means to care for her properly. She's happy here, Mr. Morrison said defensively. We love her like our own. She wants for nothing. I can see that, Juliana finally managed, finding her voice. And I am grateful, more grateful than you can possibly know, that you have cared for her, loved her, kept her safe. But she is my daughter, and I want her back. The word daughter changed something in the room. Mrs. Morrison's eyes widened, then filled with tears. You're her mother, she whispered, not a distant cousin, her true mother. I am, Juliana confirmed. I left her because I thought I had no choice, but I was wrong, and now I want to correct that mistake, if I can. Mrs. Morrison's face crumpled, and she turned away, one hand pressed to her mouth. Mr. Morrison stepped forward, his expression hardening with protective fury. You left her on church steps in February cold, he said, his voice shaking. We've held her through every cry, soothed every fear. She knows our voices, our touch. And now you come with your fine title and your Highland Laird and think you can just take her back? We do not think it, Callum said quietly. We know it will tear your hearts as surely as it tore Lady MacLeod's when she had to leave her. But she is her mother, and she has the means now to give Clara the life she deserves. And what of us? Mrs. Morrison turned back, tears streaming. We are nothing. We lose the bairn we've loved as our own and are simply meant to accept it? Callum was silent for a moment, then spoke carefully. I cannot give you Clara. She belongs with her mother. That is the way of things. But I will not erase the love you have given her these 4 months. You have been her family when she had none. He met their eyes directly. I offer you a place in her life, not as strangers who visit occasionally, but as her grandparents in truth and in name. You would see her grow, watch her flourish, remain part of her family. She would know you, love you, carry your care for her always. But we live here, Mr. Morrison said bitterly. We cannot afford to travel to the Highlands whenever— You would not travel, Callum interrupted. You would live near Glenfinnan. I have lands there, a farm that needs stewardship, larger than what you work now, with better soil and prospects. The position carries both security and respect. He paused, letting them understand. This is not payment for Clara. This is the means by which you remain her grandparents, close enough to be part of her life, not torn away by distance. Mrs. Morrison looked at her husband, tears streaming. It was not just generosity Callum offered, but the promise that their love for Clara would not be erased but honored, that they would not lose her completely. She would truly know us? Mrs. Morrison asked, her voice breaking. Not as strangers, but as family. "On my word as Laird of Glenfinnan," Callum replied. "You will be family." The Morrisons stood together in anguished silence, holding each other as they wrestled with an impossible choice made bearable only by the promise that their bond with Clara would endure. Finally, Mrs. Morrison turned to the cradle, lifted Clara gently, and held her close for a long moment, pressing kisses to the baby's forehead, whispering words of love and farewell. Then, with visible effort and streaming tears, she turned and placed the baby in Juliana's arms. "Take her," she said, her voice breaking. "Love her as we have loved her, but never make her feel she was abandoned twice. Tell her about us. Tell her we kept her warm those 4 months, that we loved her with everything we had." Juliana looked down at Clara, 4 months old now, with Jeremy's dark hair and her own brown-green eyes. The baby stared up at her with solemn curiosity, and Juliana felt something fundamental shift in her chest. "I swear it," Juliana whispered, looking up at the Morrisons through her own tears. "She will know you saved her when I could not. She will know that she was blessed with 2 families who loved her enough to do the hardest things. And you will be part of her life, not as strangers, but as the grandparents who gave her those first precious months of love." "We will," Mr. Morrison said gruffly, his voice thick with emotion. "And we will hold you to every word of that promise, Lady MacLeod." Then Glenfinnan Castle, seat of the MacLeod clan, rose from the Highland landscape like something from legend. Ancient stones softened by centuries, surrounded by lands stretching to the horizon. It was wild, beautiful, and perfect. Clara thrived in the Highland air. The clan accepted her without question. She was their laird's daughter. The Morrisons visited monthly, and the child learned to love both the parents who had chosen her and the grandparents who had saved her. When Clara was 10, Juliana and Callum told her the truth, all of it. Jeremy Lockhart, Waterloo, the impossible choice, the church steps. "Did you want to keep me?" Clara asked. "More than anything in the world," Juliana replied. "But I was alone and afraid, and I thought giving you away was the only way to protect you." "But Papa found us," Clara said, turning to Callum. "And he brought us together." "I did," Callum confirmed, "because I could not imagine a world where you and your mother were separated when I had the power to unite you. You are my daughter, Clara, not by blood perhaps, but by choice." Clara threw her arms around both of them. "I love you, both of you, and Grandmama and Grandpapa Morrison too." Over the years that followed, Juliana and Callum had 2 more children, Duncan and Margaret. Clara grew up strong and confident, never made to feel shame for her birth circumstances. When she was 16, she fell in love with a young man from a neighboring clan, a Highland Laird's son who cared nothing for society's whispers. "She is happy," Callum observed one evening as they watched Clara walk through the gardens. "Our daughter is happy." "Our daughter," Juliana repeated. "There were years when I thought I would never say that again." "But she was not lost," Callum replied, pulling his wife close. "Because you survived long enough to find me, and I was stubborn enough to refuse to let you go. Love is stronger than shame, and family is built through choice." "I chose well when I chose you," Juliana said. "We chose well," he corrected, "when we chose each other, when we chose to fight for Clara, when we chose to build a family that defied society's cruel rules." 10 years had passed since that day at St. Giles's Cathedral. 10 years since Juliana had believed herself irredeemably broken. But standing there in the Highland twilight, surrounded by the family they had built through courage and stubborn refusal to accept limitations, Juliana finally understood the truth Callum had tried to teach her. She had always been acting on her own behalf. Every survival, every step forward, every refusal to give up, they had all been acts of self-preservation, a testament to her own strength of character. And in the end, those choices had led her not to ruin, but to redemption. Not because she was rescued by a Highland Laird, but because she had finally learned to believe she was worth rescuing, worth choosing, worth fighting for, and that, more than any happy ending, was the real miracle. Sometimes life asks us to make impossible choices. Like Juliana, you may have faced moments when every option seemed wrong, when you had to choose between unthinkable alternatives. Perhaps you carry shame for decisions made in desperation. But understand this: choosing survival is never wrong. Protecting yourself when you have no other options is not cowardice. The choices you made in your darkest moments do not define your worth or determine your future. Juliana believed the choice to leave Clara marked her as unworthy of love. But she was wrong. Her capacity for love was the very thing that eventually allowed her to reclaim what she thought was lost forever. Your past choices do not disqualify you from happiness. The mistakes you think define you are not the end of your story. Like Juliana, you still have the power to choose differently, to fight for what matters. You are not broken beyond repair. You are simply human, beautifully, achingly, courageously human. Tonight, know that you too can find your place of belonging, where your whole, complicated story is welcomed and celebrated. Your redemption depends not on others' forgiveness, but on your own willingness to believe you deserve it. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, resilience, and the courage to choose yourself even when the world says you should give up.